Hello everybody, and thank you once again for tuning into my YouTube channel. Today I am going to go through my JPEG workflow for my Fujifilm files, although most of this will actually apply to any camera that you use, whether it's Fujifilm, Canon, Sony, Nikon, whatever, it should all apply still. However, this is the JPEG workflow that I use when I'm shooting JPEGs. I recently did a video about the way that I edit my RAW files, both black and white and the color ones. I'll link to those above. And one of the questions that came from that, of course, mostly was, what about the JPEGs? How do you edit those JPEGs? So today I am going to answer that question and go through my JPEG workflow in Lightroom. As always, it would be remiss of me to actually not ask you to like, subscribe, hit that bell, smash it, as they would say in America. But yeah, it really helps me if you do subscribe to the channel. The more numbers I get, the better it is for me, the more I can keep creating content for this channel. Okay, let's get straight into it. Now, the first thing to say is that these are JPEG files, of course, they're Fujifilm JPEG files, and the whole point of shooting JPEG really in the camera is to get as much right as possible in camera, to do as little editing as possible. So actually what you're going to see today is pretty minor tweaks. I'm going to show you the basic editing, and then towards the end I'm going to show you a little bit more of an advanced way of doing things using presets and tone curves, etc. But by and large, this is the way that I would edit any JPEG file that came straight from a camera. Now, with that in mind, it's worth remembering that the Fujifilm cameras allow you to save up to 7 custom settings within the camera itself, and actually so does Canon and Nikon and all of that kind of stuff. So your own different recipes will apply, and you will have your own different variants of those things. Now, from a Fujifilm point of view, at least in the latest cameras, you can record up to 7 JPEG settings, custom settings they call them, and in the older cameras I think it started with 3 and then went up to 5, etc. But certainly everything from perhaps the X100F, X-T2, X-Pro 2, X-T3, X-H1, if you're using any of those cameras, GFX, etc., you can actually get a very, very good starting point with the JPEGs in the camera and record them as custom settings. Now, I actually recorded a video recently, which I'll link to above. I'm not going to go into all of that again because it's already on the channel, which will show you how to create those custom settings, and it will actually show you the settings that I'm using also. Now, when you have those set up, what happens, of course, is the JPEGs that you bring into the camera will inherit those settings, and that's the perfect starting point, and often it can be the ending point. The ones I typically use are ones based on an emulation of Martin PARR, DARCY PADILLA, Joel Meyerowitz, and then a handful of my own ones: Street, Portrait, Night and Day. These are the ones that I use in all of my cameras these days, and these are the JPEGs that I start with from scratch, and you'll see how I manipulate those images in this video. But I'm also going to show you how I would start from, or how I would manipulate a JPEG that's just a basic standard, everything set on 0, flat JPEG image. Now, you can see from the footage in front of you my Lightroom catalog. This particular image I've titled Meyerowitz because it's using the Meyerowitz film preset. So all of these JPEGs you're going to see through this video are JPEGs straight from the camera using those presets. Now, what you can see there while I hover over the EXIF data is that all we get in Lightroom is the shooting data, 1/3000th of a second, 23mm, ISO 160, etc. I don't know about you, but I find it quite frustrating that with the JPEG EXIF data that's in Lightroom, that we can't see things like what film simulation did we use, what shadows, what highlights, etc. Now, think on a Mac you can do that. You can see that information in the Explorer or Finder or whatever they call it on a Mac. I don't use a Mac, I use a PC. So I've actually created a little tool, very simple tool, that I've popped onto my website, f16.click, as you can see there. That will allow us, me, you're more than welcome to use it, to upload an image, and it has to be a JPEG straight from the camera. It can't have been one that's a RAW that's been processed, for example. And if you just upload it, it will upload the image, it will tell you in all its glory what film simulation you use, what shadows, what highlights, etc. Because that information is in the EXIF data, but it doesn't get pass through to most pieces of software that we use. Some of them do, some of them don't. So I built this little application that's online. You can see I'm just going to go and pick an image now. I'll go for one of these ones, this one here, classic chrome. So this image was classic chrome, direct from the camera. I'll upload it, and once it's finished uploading, you see in the bottom left hand side, it's just uploading that image. It will tell me exactly what the structure of that image was from the JPEG point of view. So it tells me the film simulation, it tells me the highlight tone, it tells me the shadow tone, noise reduction, all of that kind of stuff. Now let's just upload another one just so you can see it working again. This is a macro shot of a leaf. So we'll just upload it. It takes a couple of seconds to upload it to my web server. And there we have. So this was Fujifilm Velvia, medium hard, medium soft, depending on the camera you use, depending on what information is given there, or not what information, but how it's titled. Now, down at the bottom, by the way, if you are so inclined, you find this tool nice to use, or any of the stuff I produce, actually, you're more than welcome to make a donation. On that little button there, 25% of it will go to Southwest Children's Hospital. Anyway, let's go back to Lightroom and see how we do some editing. Like I said, remember, I'm using the custom settings that I've set up in the camera, but this editing process, this workflow will work with any kind of JPEG setting that you have. I've got some wedding images. I've got 7 here. These are based on the 7 presets. Like I said, I've got Meyerowitz, I've got Mullins Day, I've got, what's next, Mullins Night. You could just see them changing slightly in the screen. Mullins Portrait, they're very subtle changes. Mullins Street, and then we have Padilla, and then we have finally Martin PARR. Now, all of these are just JPEGs, remember. It's nothing dramatic. You can have your own personal profile if you wish. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is, in this latest version of Lightroom, which is really cool, you can change the order of the panels on the develop setting, which is great. So I'm going to use split toning quite a lot today, so I'm just going to customize it. I'm going to drag split toning up to just below the tone curve, so it's just a little bit closer for me. I'll save it. It will make me restart Lightroom, and then we can get on with doing the stuff we need to do. That's a really neat new feature of Lightroom, actually, so it's worth updating your Lightroom if you don't have that and you like to, or you get frustrated with the positions of the develop panels on the right hand side. Now I've just cropped this image very slightly, and I'm just going to use the develop settings copy option to copy that crop option that I've made. Just select crop in the copy settings. There we go. And I'm just going to paste that across those other 6 images so we have the same crop throughout the whole edit. Just won't take 1 second to do that. Paste settings. Boom. There we are. Everything's cropped now, nice and straight. Now, if you did use the same JPEG settings that I've used in my custom settings before, you'll know that some of them, on the X-T3 especially, will use things like the grain strength, noise, all of that kind of stuff to try and bake in some actual noise to the image itself. So some of these images have noise baked into the JPEGs. Now, one of the benefits of RAW files, of course, is that you have total control over that. So this isn't a case of why you should use JPEGs over RAW. This is just a different way of doing stuff if you so wish. I like to shoot JPEG. I like to get as much done as possible in the camera, but you of course may use RAW, and like I said earlier, I have the RAW editing stuff that I've done also on this channel. My personal favorite is the Padilla preset, which is very high on grain. It's very punchy, very kind of contrasty, grainy image. I love that. So there's a lot of natural noise in those JPEGs, which is a great starting point for me. Okay, so the first thing I want to do with this JPEG is just maybe lighten up her eyes a little bit in this little girl. She's hanging upside down, bless her, having the time of her life. So I'm just going to use the exposure brush, or the brush on the right hand side, and use the exposure preset. I'm going to bring the size of it down. I'm just literally going to brighten up her eyes very slightly, very subtle, nothing too dramatic. All of this kind of stuff can be done to your JPEGs as well as your RAW files. Auto mask there, you'll see that option. That's really important because that will try and keep it within control. So it will try and, for example, if you're going over the eyes, it will try and keep it tight on the eyes. Now, if I go all the way to the right, you'll see how dramatic it can be and how bad it can look. So, you know, you want to bring that down to keep it as natural as possible wherever you can. Now, one of the great things of using something like Lightroom or alien skin exposure or pretty much any raw software that I'm aware of is that they are mostly non-destructive. So JPEGs actually are unlike RAW files in that they are compressed images, and the more you work on them, the more the image actually will degrade. Now, that doesn't actually come true in Lightroom itself, because it keeps all of the changes you're making separate, keeps them away from the JPEG and applies them at the end when you export. So you can actually make quite a lot of substantial changes if you so wish, without degrading the quality of the original JPEG image. It will create a new one when you export it. So now I'm looking at a color version of this image, color JPEG, and I'm just going to drag the shadows up a little bit, see how that makes a bit of a difference. Just generally doing a little bit of exposure correction to the image itself. Now, when you're shooting with a mirrorless camera, of course, you're going to see mostly in the viewfinder, so it shouldn't really be too much of an excuse to get things dramatically wrong. If I hold down the Alt key using the shadow slider, highlight slider, any of the sliders really, the Alt key will show me the clip-in, so I can see exactly where the blacks and the whites are. So I want to be a little bit careful with that when I do that edit. I've just moved over to the Mullins one, exactly the same image again, and again I'm going to hold down the Alt key, drag the highlight slider around so I can just see exactly where the burnt out highlights are, and if I can bring them back a little bit. There's the shadows, so they're okay, that's all good in that image. Let's have a look at this one. Night, it's just a very subtle difference there, and they're all good actually, they're fine. I think they're pretty good. That's the one with the burnt eyes that I showed you, so we don't need that. Those eyes are too bright. That's the exposure adjustment I did on those eyes. Now you can see again there the grain in the grass because of the Padilla, and so Padilla has a lot of noise in it. Now if I go down to the HSL panel, hues, saturation, luminance, because we're in black and white, they're not going to have any impact whatsoever. You know, the color isn't in it, so it's black and white JPEG. If you were using a RAW file and converting it to black and white, you could do all of that first, of course. So getting it right in the camera is really important with JPEGs, really important. Now if I go over to a color image, I can start moving those colors around a little bit. So green, I can drag it to make it a little bit more natural if I so wish. And you know, we can actually have a little bit more control. So the red of this lady's jacket over here, her suit, I can just make that a little bit brighter if I wanted to. You get the idea. So you have more control obviously over the colors in the color image than you would in a JPEG, a black and white JPEG. But like I said, a RAW file is going to give you much more control from the outset, but the workflow for a RAW file is much more difficult. Okay, so let's move over to this image. This is a totally flat JPEG from the camera. It didn't have any of my custom settings applied. It's just an Acros file. Everything else is set to 0, highlight, shadow tone, etc. It's all set to 0, so totally flat image from the camera. Now I'm going to hit the develop module, of course, and we're going to try and work on this image to just to see if we can get it to the level that we want. And of course, it's a very visual thing this. That's the whole point of using things like Lightroom. You can just see everything adjusting in real time. So I'll move the shadows, the highlights a little bit. I'll just nudge the tone curve also. I'll just move that up a little bit just to get a little bit of brightness in there. Bring that dark down slightly again. Underneath you can see the lights and the highlights and the shadows and all of those sliders moving accordingly, so you can do it manually if you so wish. Now clarity is really important, I think, for JPEG images. See the punch there? See how that just kind of gives it a little bit more crispness? And obviously saturation doesn't work on a black and white image. You can't make a black and white JPEG color, but you can make a color JPEG image black and white. Again, one of the other benefits of RAW, of course, is that it's always color in the outset. So I've just cropped it, and now I'm just going to use the Alt button on the highlights and shadows again, just to double check the clip in, see what we've got, and just bring it back up to where I'm happy, and that's good. Happy with that so far. Now the next thing I want to do is just brighten up the little girl a little bit, so I'm just going to hit the adjustment brush, there it is, and I'm going to make sure that I have exposure set in the drop down list. You may have lots of things in there, depends if you've got plugins or presets, but exposure will be a default one. Just going to drag it over her face very, very subtly, just bring it up slightly, maybe a little bit down the arm as well, on the dress, just a little bit of pop, just to bring that into a line with what I want. So I'll close that off, that brush. Now all of this area here is actually still a bit bright. You know, it's actually okay, but I want her to pop a little bit more. So I'm going to use the exposure brush again, and I'm going to, this time I'm going to make it a negative value. Okay, so we'll start at maybe 1, I don't know, something like that, a stop. And I'm going to make the brush much bigger. I'm actually just going to brush around everything else except her. So you can see already how she's popping a lot more. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move down to the post-crop vignette all the way down the bottom, just to give the image a little bit of a border, darker border. Literally all I do is I knock the keep it on highlight priority and just knock the vignette down very slightly, -10, something like that. It's perfect. That's all I need to do. That's something you can't do in the camera at all, JPEGs or RAWs. I'm going to crop it a little bit just to get rid of some of the clutter on the right hand side. And yeah, we're pretty good actually. It's not too bad, pretty good going now. All I need to do now is do a slight warm up of the image. So I'll do a split tone on the highlights. Around about 35 is normally good enough for me. It's normally where I hit it. Now on the X-T3 you can actually warm up the JPEGs in the camera. Obviously I'm going to drag it there so you can see how extreme it can be. But around about 10 is usually what I have, so 35 degrees hue and 10 on the saturation is pretty good. Like I say, on the X-T3 and probably on future Fujifilm cameras you'll be able to do that in the camera, in the JPEG itself. Whether you have the control over it you want, or whether you still do it in post-production, that's entirely up to you. I'm just going to drag that down a tiny little bit more, close it off, and yeah, it's good. Pretty happy with that as it stands. It's all good. And what we've got left to do, I'm just going to double check a couple of these, make sure everything is good. White, see the whites there, if I bring those up it becomes a little bit too bright I think there, so I might just back that back slightly. There we go, you can just see it. You can still see all the detail, but you know, we don't obviously want it to be too glaring, too bright. And the face again, so I'll go back to the brush. Here's the existing one I had. I'm just going to pop it up again just to see if it makes more of a difference. There you go, brighten, and see again, you can see in the chest there it's probably a little bit too bright. So the clarity here, and that's on the brush itself, so it's only adding clarity to the little girl. So yeah, it's okay, it's not too bad. That's the original, and this is the edited JPEG. I would probably back off on the highlights a little bit more if I was doing this for an actual wedding edit. Other than that, pretty good. In fact, let's just do that. Let's just bring that back because it will annoy me otherwise. Slide that exposure, slide those highlights back, and close off that brush. And there we go, before and after, before and after. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Okay, let's head over to one of the high ISO images, 10,000 ISO, 16mm, XF16mm, 1/125th of a second, f1.8. Relatively, you know, clean considering the ISO level. Remember, the noise reduction in the camera will have been applied. You know, if you're doing this with RAW, you have to do all of your noise reduction afterwards. So it's pretty good. Probably what I don't like about the image, as I look at the, you know, it's fine straight out of the camera pretty much, but the white balance is a little bit off. So I just want to adjust the white balance a little bit here. Maybe I'm going to, you know, typically I would look for teeth or something like that. Try and get that RGB value as close together as possible in terms of the numbers. And yeah, we're all right. It's good, pretty good. So I'm just going to straighten it up and pop up the clarity slightly just to give it a little bit of depth. See if I drag it all the way, you can see how much you can get out of that. Now the saturation here will work because it's a color image, so I can pull that up a little bit if I want. And the temperature, again, I might just nip that up very slightly just to warm it up. It's quite blue light at that wedding. So that's all pretty much good to go. I want to do my post-crop vignette. There we go, bring that in, and yeah, that's good. Just bring those highlights, see if there's any clip in. There is, but it's sparkling lights. Shadows are all good. And the whites and highlights, of course, there's going to be whites, and blacks is going to be in those images. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This again is Acros with G, so this will be my portrait film simulation custom setting within the camera. Acros G, and again, I'm just going to do some basic adjustments, tone curve, just to give it a little bit more oomph, I suppose, a little bit of more punch. You know, it's good. These black and whites are lovely out of the camera. I'll add my warmth to the image, 35 and 7. Remember we said that earlier. It's a little bit golden. You know, I typically apply warmth to most of the black and whites these days. I used to do it to pretty much everything. Almost everything these days, I would say. Definitely the weddings anyway. So we'll go to the exposure slider there. We're just going to bring it down slightly. I'm going to increase the brush and brush around outside just to decrease the darker, just to make it a little bit darker, just so she can pop more, bless her, in the image itself. Close down the brush, and her face, okay, you know, I'm gonna increase the clarity generally because I want to see a little bit more on her face. Shadows, I want to bring the detail back in the coat just so we can see a little bit more there. That's okay. Yeah, I'm happy with the image as it stands. Very simple, very basic adjustments. There's not a lot to it, and that's the whole point of shooting JPEG. You just don't need to do too much to it at all. So we'll just maybe brighten her face up very slightly. Again, go onto a brush, exposure. This time I want to increase it, of course, and just bring the brush size down. Just dab it on her face, knock it over her hat, just to bring that. It's a little bit much. Push it back, just maybe a third of a stop. That seems to work okay for that. And we'll close that down. I'm going to check the highlights and the shadows again using the Alt key. It's important to do this. Pretty much every image I'll try that, make sure that there's nothing that's clipping that could be recovered, or should be recovered, I should say. Yeah, and that's all right. Now, in terms of sharpening, I don't do any sharpening at all, none whatsoever, until output. So I'll go through that in a moment, but none of the sharpening is done. Even for raw files, I just accept the defaults. JPEGs will always have 0 in their sharpening because the sharpening is done in the camera typically. But I will show you the little bit of output sharpening that happens. I'll show you that in a short while. So that's all good to go, I think. Okay, so let's move on to this image. This is Velvia X Pro 2, shot with a 60mm macro lens. It's a leaf, in case you hadn't wondered. And actually, I don't know, there's not much I can do to this image. This is obviously pretty good, just exactly what I wanted straight out of the camera. Raw file would need a lot of work to it. I might just knock the clarity up a little bit just to give it a little bit more punch. Yeah, and you know, that's all good. Now because it is a color image, color JPEG, I can control the HSL panel if I so wish. If I want to bring the greens down a little bit to make it, you know, a tiny bit warmer, less kind of garish, I guess. I need to do that, and you know, I can control all of those HSL curves, or HSL sliders, I should say. Let's go on to this one of the purple flower. This is ProNeg high film simulation in the camera, and again, it's fine. You know, there's nothing really that needs to do that. I'll just hit that reset so you can see that it's directly out of the camera. Maybe I'll bring the clarity up again on that just to give it a little bit of depth. Shadows, I might just check. Yeah, so you can just see some of the clipping in there. I'm just going to pull that back. And so all of that shadow then has got some kind of detail in it that is allowable. And maybe I will again just have a look, is it magenta or purple? Let's just check the saturation. Purple, I'm going to bring it up a little bit just to give it a little bit more vibrance in that color. Yeah, that's good to go. The greens, it's all fine. I'm going to pull it back slightly here. That's more natural to me, I think. Although I took this image a very long time ago, so I cannot remember exactly what it looked like. But I'm happy with that. Simple. So back to this one of the little girl, bless her, and I'll just mention that we will talk about the sharpening, the output sharpening, which we'll do right now. So as I said, I only do that on export. So file, export, sharpening, it's going to be down towards, but I have all of my kind of presets, export presets here, but we'll just do the high-res finals. And if you go right down, you have the output file settings there, so JPEG, and as soon as I export, it will create a new JPEG. But this is the important thing: sharpen for screen or matte paper if it's going to an album, or glossy paper. And I always just leave it on standard. That's it. I don't do any sharpening of any consequence after that. That's all I need to do. Now, I understand obviously if you're a portrait photographer or landscape, you may need to do a little bit more detailed sharpening, but typically you'd be shooting raw anyway in those cases. Okay, so let's talk about how we can speed this process up, and that's all down to presets and a little bit of funky business with the tone curve and having a custom tone curve also. So this is the classic Chrome, the original one, directly out of the camera, and you'll see I've got a preset there, KMP Punch JPEG I call it. It's for JPEGs only. I wouldn't apply that to a raw file. And there's the before and there's the after. Just one click, boom, straight away. It works really nice on most images. You would need to eyeball it on every image, of course. Now, all of that does is adds the clarity and a few of the other settings. I'll just apply it on the black and white now as well, so you can see how that works with exactly the same preset. Boom. So it's warming it up, it's adding the clarity, there's the before, there's the after. It's doing pretty much everything that we've talked about already, but just in one simple preset. And all we need to do really is to have that as a, actually let's just try it as one of the others, the original ones that we had here. So let's try the Meyerowitz one. Go to develop, I'll reset it so it's back to how it was. Meyerowitz, of course, is a color preset. And see how that looks with that KMP punch. There we go. So that would need a little bit more work, and I bring the highlights down on that one. But other than that, that's okay. You know, I think pretty much that's good to go. So we'll have a look on the Mullins Day. We'll reset it. Takes away that crop, and we'll apply that to KMP punch JPEG. Again, it's too bright, so I'll need to just bring that exposure down, just the highlights. And there we go, everything. It's got a nice little warmth, everything that I need to do to those JPEGs. So that preset kind of works across most of my JPEGs. Let's try it on this one. We haven't seen this image earlier. So this is an Acros one. I'm going to reset it. There we go, a lot of dark in there. So you can see how the JPEGs can recover a lot of the dynamic range in the shadows. So I'll just apply the preset. And yeah, it's okay, it's a bit dark in the face and all that kind of stuff, so I'm going to bring the shadows up a bit. And I'd say you typically got about 3 stops of correction compared to 5 stops in a raw file. But it's all nice, you know, that one stop is the way, that one step to just apply it straight away. I'm very happy with that. Now the key to this is the tone curve. So here I have a custom tone curve, and you'll also see that the point curve underneath has my own preset, KMP Punch. It's called Mono, but I apply it to all of them. And you can save your own tone curves. All you need to do is just drop that list down. Once you've got a tone curve that works for you, drop that list down and you can choose Save As. You can see the values there. You can pause the video and look at those values independently if you so wish. It's very simple to do. Get a tone curve that you're happy with. Drop down the point curve option at the bottom and then just save it with your own preset, and you're good to go. And that's it. That really is it when it comes to the editing. That preset, that KMP Punch JPEG, is just a one-stop click that gets me where I need to be. I need to do just some kind of final adjustments if I so wish. You know, and then we're done. It's very, very straightforward. Just bring that back a little bit, darken off the areas, which we did that earlier before anyway, and we're very happy with that image. Keep it going, bring that down, close off the brush, and yeah, that's it. So really with JPEGs, there isn't much that needs to be done to them. That's the whole point of JPEGs. Bring the clarity down a touch. You know, if you shoot RAW, of course, that is entirely your prerogative. That's the full screen version of that. One click, JPEG edit, clarity, warming it up very slightly, before and after, as we can see there. Nice, you know, it's finished. Now, of course, this is my own personal style. Your style may vary, your mileage may vary, as they say. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've picked up a few little tips and tricks. And please do like, please do subscribe, please share, comment below, all of that good stuff. And thank you very much. I will see you in the next video.